We'll start. All right, so I've got to open this up with a joke this time because I thought this joke was so funny, and if I would have told it, my son would have said that's a dad joke, but instead he told it to me, and I said it's a dad joke, and he said no, it's funny. So John, you've written vampires, right?
Yeah,
Okay, you know vampires don't exist, right?
sure.
Unless you count Dracula. It's
That's
so
a
bad,
dad
it's funny.
that's a dad joke.
It is a bad joke. All right, welcome to the Lovecraftian podcast. Pete's fallen down on the job, so I had to do the joke for today.
Wow. Just
Um,
wow.
yeah, yeah. I'm
You
like,
should have seen Rich's face. He just winced so badly.
when I told that joke,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Perfect.
it's bad. It's a bad joke. I'm Mike Davis, Lovecraft Ezine. Let's do introductions, and then we'll talk to John Horner Jacobs. Hey, John, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with Pete,
Hey,
who
I'm
did
Pete
not tell a
Rollick,
joke today.
and I'm very comfortable tonight.
Are you sick? You're in bed.
I'm a little under the weather, but it's also like 58 degrees out, and
58. Yeah, that sounds
50.
really cold. Are you gonna? Is there a freeze warning out down there in Florida?
No, not yet. But the
Did,
pool is closed.
did you cover the plants, the perennials, everything?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
The iguanas are moving a little slower right
Yeah. Rick,
Rick Lay writer.
Ben,
Benjamin Handelman. I'm Mike's support animal.
that's true. And Rich Bunting. Hey, Rich, you're muted. Still muted.
Here we go.
There you
Rich
go.
Bunting. I'm a Patreon.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that too. Um, and okay, so John, will you give us a short introduction for those who out there who don't know who you are?
Sure. My name's John Hornor Jacobs. I go by my full name because I'm tired of having people sing John Jacobs Jingleheimer Schmidt to me 1 billion times. But I'm the author of 10 novels. My first novel, I'm best probably known for my first novel, which is Southern Gods, was my first sort of foray into mashing up Lovecraft and crime and Southern Gothic literature. I've written a series of young adult novels called the Incarcerado series, which also hinted towards sort of, massive eldritch gods. I have a fantasy series called the Incorruptibles, comprised of the Incorruptibles, Infernal Machines, and Foreign Devils, which is kind of like a weird Western. Also acknowledges sort of the presence of sort of Lovecraftian horrors, but it's not the focus. And then I've written a pseudonymous novel. I've got my new book out is called Lush and Seething Hell, and it's
Yep, right here for those who are watching. So
that's right. And I've got a short story collection on the way out next year called Murder Ballads and Other Horrific Tales, and other novels on the way. So
are the young adult novels the 12 fingered?
the 12 fingered boy, the shibboleth, and the conformity. Yeah.
Okay. Hey, it's Jeffrey Thomas. Hey, Jeff. He
Hey,
disappeared
Mike.
again. Oh, there you are. There you
How are
are.
you?
Good to have you. Um, so I saw somewhere, I saw on your blog that some people were saying that on the A Lush and Seething Hell, it's two novellas, or maybe one's a novel, one's a novella. Hard to say. Um, and they
No, it's
were.
easy to say.
Uh,
It's one is a short novel and one's a novella. Just like technically, one is 65,000 words and one is 39,000.5
okay.
words. So one is a novella and one's a short novel.
Well, apparently you got some comments like from a minority of people saying why are these two stories together? And I mean, I had no problem with it because I read right on the cover two tales of cosmic horror. So
Right.
you know, but yeah, why were they saying that? I just thought two cosmic horror stories.
Well, it was a weird book deal. So I wrote this novella. I was writing a big sort of historical novel, and I was getting bogged down in it. And I realized it was going to take me a while to write. And I wanted to write something and get something out into the world. So, and I had been reading a bunch of Tor's novellas like Cass Claw and Stephen Graham Jones and Victor Laval, and all those great sort of horror novellas they've been putting out. Jeffrey Ford, and I really sort of fell in love with that. So I had an idea for a novella. So I said I wrote it. I was going to write it, and I wrote it in like 25 days, and then I polished it up for like a day. I mean, I didn't take a lot of time to polish it up. Sent it to my agent, thinking she probably wouldn't want to represent it because novellas are notoriously hard to sell. And just said, listen, do you want to represent this? Otherwise, I had a small press publisher who would probably just publish it on the strength of our relationship. And but she goes, no, I'll sell this. And within 3 weeks, 4 weeks, we had 3 offers from publishers, and from good ones. And Tor offered. Unfortunately, that was my dream publisher to work with Tor. But then HarperCollins came along and offered more money, so we had to go with that.
Well, yeah, but the Sea Dreams it is what the Sea Dreams It Is the Sky. Was that previously available on Kindle?
Yes. So the deal was, this is the weird deal, is like, all right, we got this book. We want you to write another novella. That was all I was contracted to write, another novella. And then we're going to publish the first novella, The Sea Dreams It Is the Sky, in ebook only. And then once you deliver the second novella, we're going to package it in hardback. And then that was a sort of deal. I ended up writing a little bit longer than a novella, but I didn't feel really constrained to, but it was still a short novel, 65,000 words. So, yeah. And so that was so it was that the Sea Dreams was out in ebook only for the year leading up to this publication. So now it was taken down, and now Lush and Seething Hale is out there. But I mean, I wrote them to fit together. Like, that was my point. Was a lot of people are saying they're two unrelated stories, but they are very related.
Yeah. And as a side note, Pete, the Sea Dreams It Is the Sky, I had bought it on Kindle, and I checked yesterday. It's still available to me on Kindle since I bought it, but I also looked at Amazon. It's no longer available to buy on Amazon. So, in other words, it didn't just go away. Sometimes you've expressed concerns about that. So, yeah, and you're muted too. So,
yeah, we've seen that happen where, and this may be because the publisher still exists, but where books, where the publisher has essentially gone out of business, and the book drops out of Amazon's catalog, and then it just drops out of people's Kindles.
Yeah. Well, I just thought it was interesting that it did not happen in this case. I haven't personally seen it happen. I think you have to some small press publishers. So, guys, please feel free to jump in with questions. Interrupt me. You do anyway.
Okay. So you offered, and since I have to go.
Yeah, no, go ahead. I love it when I don't have to talk.
Let's talk about Southern Gods for a few minutes, John.
Okay.
First of all, I apologize.
You should.
When the PS Publishing did that little book on the Starry Wisdom catalog book auction, you should have been the one to do the entry for the Kanuna-i-Islam.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's critical to this book.
Right.
And you should have been tapped to do that. And I don't know why you weren't. But it's amazing, because I think, like, only 3 people who, it's from the case of Charles Dexter Ward.
Yeah.
And very few people remember it. And it's got a sort of weird history. And it's a real book. And so what made you what drove you to use it for this book? Just because somebody else had?
So I was very much one of my favorite things about Lovecraftian literature, cosmic horror, is the sort of academia of it. The sort of study of literature. In this, I wanted to create sort of my evil book, my bad book, and I did that with the Opusculus Noctis,
Right.
which also features in Southern Gods, but also features in The Sea Dreams It Is the Sky, which they translate as a little night work. And but I wanted to add my sort of evil book to the milieu of books that are out there. So that was this. And by quote, I had just read Charles Dexter Ward, which was a pretty major influence on, probably one of the more overt influences on Southern Gods, where it's like, don't call up and you can't put down. I think I say that explicitly. It's been a long time since I've looked at the Southern Gods text, but yeah. So I just thought that was a nice nod to an evil book. There's also the book Ibon, however you pronounce it, in there. And there's actually a scene which I've done again and again, where they sort of catalog like a library, and they look at what's in the library, and I just thought it was fun to like contrast like a Faulkner novel and a popular piece of fiction with these sort of evil books in the same library, which was kind of a tongue-in-cheek, very literary tongue-in-cheek approach.
Yeah, and it's nice because I watched you go from sort of you begin with sort of this high European, the Earl King,
yeah,
and then it transforms into Southern Gothic, touch of Cthulhu mythos,
yeah,
some Zoroasterism, and you run the rampant through some really different mythologies and bring them all together very well.
Well, I mean, there's been a lot of people who would disagree with that statement, but that was the very first book I wrote. So like I have been blessed and cursed by the fact that every single thing I've written is out there for people to look at and evaluate. So you can look at sort of like my progression as a novelist by reading Southern Gods and then sort of going through it, where I've sort of learned how to tell stories better. It's I think better. It's weird to me that though Southern Gods is still my most popular book, but it has a lot of things going for it. It was a big sort of smorgasbord of mythology, and that was what, like I've always said, I am not like those guys who are those sort of Call of Cthulhu fans that just know the lexicon and every single Lovecraftian god and like its history and relevance and everything. Like I'm not that guy. I don't have that type of lexiconic knowledge of it. I am very much, I like certain things about that sort of cosmic horror, and I like to play with them, but they're not really. I am by no means an expert.
I have to say I'm exactly the same, John. Which I was having lunch with Sandy Peterson, who, as we all know, does have that knowledge a few years ago, and since he created Call of Cthulhu, and he started talking about something. He goes, "But of course you know all these monsters and everything." I'm like, "No, I don't." He goes, "What do you mean?" I was like, "I just like the cosmic horror aspect,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I've got some Lovecraft knowledge, but the cosmic horror is what draws me in."
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
To me, this is very reminiscent of F. Paul Wilson's The Keep, in that you start with an underlying theme of cosmic horror, make a couple nods to Lovecraft, and then you're off into your own direction.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I wanted it to be a crime. I wanted it to be like a hard-boiled crime.
Well, so the opening, you nailed me with both the 13th Gate and Angel Heart.
Okay.
and this is going to sit between those two books on my shelf. Because
I don't know the first one. What is the first one?
I think you mean the Ninth Gate, don't you?
oh, I'm sorry, the Ninth Gate.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That was that a book? That's a movie, right? With Johnny Depp?
It's a movie and a book. Yeah.
It's called the Club Dumas.
The Club Dumas. And actually, I'm going to meet the author next weekend.
Oh, nice.
You better have that sorted out.
Yeah.
Yeah, get his title right.
Yeah. Don't ask him to sign the 13th Gate for you or anything like that.
Well, it actually came out. I think it came out in paperback that way after the movie came out with Johnny Depp. But yeah.
Oh, right.
Anyway, so if you're not familiar with that book, The Ninth Gate, the main character's name is Corso.
I've seen the movie, which I liked. I liked a lot. I have not. Also, I've not read Angel Falling.
Falling Angel by William Hortzberg.
Yeah, I've not read that. I've seen the movie. Honestly, everyone makes, or not everyone. A lot of people have said like this is like Falling Angel. I didn't.
Only a little bit.
Yeah, I didn't really think. It's kind of like, in some ways, it's more a redemption story. It's just sort of like set in the sweltering South, and so it has sort of infernal overtones. So there's going to be like likenesses drawn to that. But
since you brought it up, Pete, I got to say, I think The Ninth Gate, the movie, is very, very good. I've watched it several times. Not only that, but I forget who composed the soundtrack, but it's got a great soundtrack.
It's Roman Polanski directed it.
Yeah.
And he's, of course, directed many a cool story, like Rosemary's Baby, The Tenant, Repulsion, so forth.
Yeah. So good movie.
I forgot that he directed that. He's not a good guy.
No.
Probably should be in jail.
That's a whole other topic, but an incredible artist.
Yeah.
And you said, or you wrote somewhere, that the stories in a Lush and Seething Hell are set in the same universe as Southern Gods.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in Southern Gods, it has, in these books, both these stories, I was sort of trying to go back and sort of capture some of the, after, you write for a decade and then you sort of start, being a snake that's eating its own tail, sort of revisiting some of the things you started out with, especially if they've been more popular. So in the Sea Dreams, literally we're dealing with the same manuscript, photographs of the manuscript that's in Southern Gods. And then in the second book in A Lush and Seething Hell, which is called My Heart Struck Sorrow, it's set in the American South. It's set in the same sort of town. There's some characters that are related. They're mentioned in passing, but yeah. So I mean, they inhabit the same universe.
Yeah, and no spoilers, but I got to say, the end of the Sea Dreams, I did not for 1 minute see that coming. So,
okay,
good.
That's
great. Yeah.
What was it? I mean, I hope it worked for you.
It did. It brought a lot of things together for me that I didn't quite understand earlier in the book. And now, one of our usual panelists is Matt Carpenter, and he's not here today, but he emailed me a question for you. So This is from Matt. This is about the Sea Dreams. Matt says, I found the entire story fascinating in a terrible sort of way. I also appreciated that while there was a cosmic terror component, it was very deep in the background compared to the terror inflicted on the people by their own government. I was wondering how the author came to be interested in this part of Argentinian history. Do you have any personal connections to Argentina? Is there something that you've read you would recommend other people look at? Looks like these are a lot of questions at once, but I'll just finish reading it. Can you explain how you thought of mingling together cosmic terror, and we still can't tell if that was any worse than what people do to each other? And then he says it's a great story, and we wanted to know how you came up with the title as well. So
right, okay, so that's a lot. I'm going to try to address it as quickly as I can.
Sure, take time.
So the whole sort of generative idea behind it was I was reading a lot of Roberto Bolaño, and at the time he's got a novel called 2666, which is it's a very academic novel. It's amazing. It is hard. It is hardcore. I mean, but it is also a doorstop. It's gigantic, and I kept feeling as I read it that this is a little bit of background biographical info. Roberto Bolaño was an exiled Chilean. So in both Chile and Argentina, around the same times, they had dictators come into power that really subjugated their populace. In Chile, Pinochet came to power, and he killed more than 3,000 people, executed them, buried them in mass, graves, and he tortured over 10,000. People who are still living have tales of this. One of the reasons why in the Sea Dreams It Is a Sky that it's set in a made up country was because I just didn't want to talk about people. There are still people alive who have suffered under these dictators down there. I didn't want to minimize their suffering. I just wanted to use it as a loose sort of use the sort of situations. And when I was writing it wasn't as bad in America. So, but it seemed like it was this kind of a timeless, when I was writing it, all the refugee camps in America, all that stuff was not known. So it turned out it was a fairly timeless, or evergreen tweet, as they say. But so the whole idea, when I was reading it and I was learning about it, I was also learning America's influence in the Chilean coup, where Pinochet and his group, his junta, really deposed the socialist government and president with the help of Henry Kissinger and the CIA, and it was funded by the CIA. And America kind of acted in that situation as this massive, vast Cthulian god coming down there and behind the scenes manipulating it. And that was the idea.
Wow, that's an interesting, yeah.
And, like to smaller countries, the influence of America is very much like a malevolent, vast god, coming down and dictating things. So that was the basis of the sort of the generative idea. But then once I did more research, I was like, holy shit, man, the shit that the people themselves did to each other was just horrendous, and there's countless, there are countless accounts, first person accounts of it. It's very bad. So it was part sort of drilling down into the details of what happened, and it was part part sort of the Lovecraftian, the cosmic horror, malevolent entity on the sort of macro level, and I felt like they came together. And another thing was I wanted to write a story about. I had just written 6 books by very wise but very uneducated people from a first person point of view, and I didn't want to. I wanted to write educated people. I wanted to be free of the fetters of like writing for uneducated people, not but like from the perspective in first person. So having all academics in this book in A Lush and Seething Hell freed me up to make references and use mythology and use literary techniques that to really sort of just let me play. And so that was another reason. And traditionally, cosmic horror has been fairly literate. So all those things sort of came together for that book.
There's some very there's a section of the book where one of the main characters gets tortured, and I found that I told you before the show started that I was reading the book. Thank you for sending it to me, by the
Sure.
way, and signing it. I really appreciate that. I was reading the book, and then when I was ready for bed, I would find where I was at in the audio book, and I would listen to it until I fell asleep. Well, one night I was listening to it and I came to that section of the book, and I found, interestingly enough, that I couldn't listen to it. I could read it because that allowed me to distance myself a little bit from it, if that makes sense.
Right.
But listening to it, I, I don't know if it's just me, if I have too much empathy, if there's such a thing, but I just couldn't handle it being told to me by a person. I had to go
Right.
back and just read it. And yeah, it's Matt's question makes a lot of sense. You know, which is worse, the cosmic horror or what people do to each other?
Well, I mean, taken in the context of history, if you just look at it as America's involvement, they're both kind of, I mean, they're one is just a macro level, and the other one is sort of the distillation of that, like interference. I think they're both terrible. I mean, there's a lot, they're war crimes.
Right.
Uh, it's kind of a kindness for me to say, like, yeah, here's this malevolent, cosmic God pulling the strings rather than America. It's kind of like forgiving America some of its, terrible interference. Hold on,
Reminds me of,
my cat is meowing. Hold on one second.
We accept cats on the show, so that's no problem.
Yeah, I've got one sleeping right behind me.
Cosmic horror.
He's visible in the stream.
Wow.
I know that much.
While John's gone, hey, Jeff, good to see you.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks.
I'm back. Sorry.
I'm late.
That's all right. That's all right. Um,
Sorry, don't have a cat.
sorry you don't have a cat.
I feel like I'm a faker, a poser. I don't have a cat.
We just got another cat because apparently four was not enough. So yeah,
Okay,
now we have five.
On my behalf, please.
So
John, what you were saying about the that using kind of a cosmic god as sort of the orchestrator of these horrors downplays sort of that man is capable of doing them themselves, like the Holocaust.
Sure.
And I think that's something we've seen a lot even in the real world, where you had people saying, oh, well, it wasn't like, this is the devil's work in humanity, and they can't take personal responsibility. And that's even something you've had to see modern people sort of grapple with, this idea that, oh, wait, it's not the devil. It's people doing terrible things because, I don't know if you think back to any of the psychological experiments in the 50s and 60s where they proved that, like, normal people could do really horrible things if you just tell them someone else is in charge or will take the penalty for it. Or
yeah,
so I think that is sort of like an important thing
orders,
to do
yeah.
with your story. And, that's actually a real world issue right now, where people are suddenly they can no longer blame the devil, and it turns out humans are worse.
Yeah.
it makes me think of a quote, John. Fantasy book critic interviewed you, I think it was a year or two ago, and I'm quoting you now. Humans as a species are very much like a person who takes too many selfies. Our favorite subject matter is ourselves. We can't even interact with the natural world without anthropomorphizing everything. Also, we're really monstrous. It's true, yet we tell stories many times to convince ourselves that we're not living on a planet teeming with the hominid monsters, each full of their own desires and drives. We tell stories to convince ourselves that we're not monsters, that we're actually good. So,
Isn't this one of the themes behind Lovecraft Country?
yeah,
Yeah.
there's similar. There's definitely similarities too. I was thinking.
Well,
that.
I mean, and I don't want to spoil the ending of the book, but yes, Pete, it's like a main point in the story. The idea that, like, well, you can escape these Lovecraftian horrors eventually, but you can't escape Jim Crow, right? And that was sort of one of the main factors in that novel. And I think we even see this, I mean, to carry it forward, is that, so you had the Milgram experiment and those things in the 50s. And now you have a lot of this kind of self-help guru stuff where, oh, everyone's good and perfect. And it's sort of like a shock reaction to people actually aren't good and perfect. They'll do bad things. So,
this should have been one of my first questions, John, but with these two books in Lush and Seething, Hale, could you give the audience kind of a short spoiler-free synopsis of each story? for those who have not
Okay.
read it?
Sure. In A Sea Dreams of the Sky, it's about two expatriated South Americans whose country has been taken over by a dictator, much like Pinochet, sort of finding each other. And one of them, hold on, my cat's about to get in front of my computer. Hey, go away. One of them, the older poet, who's an older man, because he wants to, he feels he has to go back to their homeland and see if he can find his wife and child and what happened to them. Goes back and leaves a professor in charge of his effects in his apartment, who discovers this manuscript, which is his testament, and it outlines a sort of Lovecraft, a story within a story, a found manuscript. It outlines this sort of Lovecraftian influence, this cosmic influence that helped overthrow their country and place the current sort of monstrous regime in power.
I believe I read that you said that this story takes place in 1987, and then the story within a story takes place in 1974. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
So, if you look at the timeline of Chile, Pinochet was deposed in 1994. Like, he was in power for 20 years, having committed just monstrous acts against his own populace. And then he was, it was like in the 2000s. He was like in The Hague or something. I can't remember exactly where he was, but he was in Europe, for war crimes, locked up until like the early 2000s. Finally, I think he ultimately died of old age and was never. I don't know the exact thing, but one of the reasons I write fiction is because I'm not really good with details on history. You don't have to be. When you make up your own country.
That's right.
That's right.
And then,
yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Oh, and the second story, it deals with another found manuscript. It's about ethnomusicologists who. It's about two people who work at the Library of Congress who discover that a woman who is the granddaughter of the most infamous person who worked at the Library of Congress died and bequeathed all their belongings to the Library of Congress, among which are a trove of acetates and journal entries about this guy named Harlan Parker, who was an ethnomusicologist who had an unhealthy fascination with the infernal verses of a song, a very famous song called Stagger Lee. And so it is the story of these two agents of the Library of Congress going through these acetates. So it's very much a music base. It's very much about music, but it also deals with stories within stories, found footage. And it's both of these stories exist in sort of the liminal space between like hardcore horror when the vampire reveals itself or the boogeyman shows itself, and just the real world. Like in the Sea Dreams, you could think that very much that these are just people who are demented by the stress of having their country taken over. In my Heart Struck Sorrow, it is also a sort of liminal space that we inhabit, where it's fevered journals from a guy who might be dying of whose brain might be rotting from syphilis, who is traveling all over the South, the humid South, living out of his car, drinking too much, and all these strange things are happening. And is it because he's going crazy or so?
Yeah, I love that. That's also again, if I can say this without spoiling anything in the Sea Dreams, the way that the young scholar finds the third, what do we want to call it, locator note?
Yeah, the longitude and latitude.
Yes, the way that she finds that, or excuse me, where she finds that. That's a very chilling scene. That was great. I love that.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I had to get, sometimes I'm like, I'm doing like, when you're writing, you're like, I'm doing these really, sort of abstract and intellectual things. And then you got to just occasionally remind somebody with a corpse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a horror story, by the way.
Who was it? Oh God, the B director, not
Roger Corman.
Yeah, I mean, he used to like teach script writing. Is like every 5th page, nudity.
Yeah,
you got to do it.
Yeah.
You know, because you're at a Roger Corman film.
But there was some crime writer. I can't remember if it was like Mike Hammer or whatever, the guy who wrote. But it was like whenever I don't know what's going to happen next, I have to find a corpse. Like,
I heard something similar. Like if you when in doubt, bring a man in the scene with a gun.
Yeah.
The reader will not care why. They'll just be grateful that there's a man with a gun.
So you're very interested in. I'm sorry, Rick. Please.
John, Staggered Lee is a real song.
Yes.
Are you? All I know, the only Stagger Lee I know is Nick Cave's Stagger Lee.
Okay. Well, I will give you. I am actually, after writing this book, I am an expert on Stagger Lee. Stagger Lee is a song. It's a folk song that came from a real incident. Lee Shelton and a guy, Billy Lyons, got into an argument at a sporting house in St. Louis in the 1800s, and Stagger Lee shot him. A sporting house was a brothel in a gambling hall. So over the years, the story of it got bigger and bigger, and it's a bad man ballad or a murder ballad. Okay.
Yeah.
So in America, there are 2 modalities of the song. One is the African American modality, because Lee Shelton and Billy Lyons were both black men. There is a tradition of the song that exists in black culture in America that is different from the sort of Caucasian versions, which is very folky. You can hear versions. I have a Spotify playlist with like over 160 versions of this song, but most of them are based on the two main modalities. You can listen to like Dave Van Ronk and Woody Guthrie play the sort of white modality, which is very moralistic. It tells a story of it. It just pretty much basically tells a story of what happened, but it's gotten so far away from like the events that sometimes it happens in a coal mine, sometimes it happens on the street corner, sometimes they're playing cards, sometimes they're playing craps, sometimes they're it just changes. So in the 1930s, when Alan Lomax and John Lomax's father, Dr. John Lomax, were going around and recording for the Library of Congress real Southern musicians and all over the South and in the eastern part of the country, they were going around recording it, and they weren't recording any religious music, because religious music tends to be formalized very quickly. Because there's sheet music, but secular music, folk music, are passed down in an oral tradition. One musician showing another musician how to play it, and it changes, and it happens to represent the sort of fears and the societal, psyche at the time. Yeah. So on the Caucasian side, you get it to be very moralistic, where they do this thing where they repeat over and over again that he's a bad man, Stagger Lee. He's a bad man, and it's usually kind of lame. When I say lame, it's like really straightforward beats, playing on the beats, no syncopation, very humdrum vocal harmonies. But then when you get to the South, you have the black tradition, which takes it and twists it so that it starts becoming like over the years, it starts becoming about Stagger Lee's hat, and his hat becomes a symbol of his manhood. So like they're gambling over a hat, a Stetson hat. And at the most common version of Stagger Lee is by a guy named Lee Shelton, who who ends it with them sort of jubilantly singing "Go Stagger Go, Go Stagger Go." And there's a wonderful book called "Staggo Lee Shot Billy" that talks about all the versions of the song and how sociologically really fascinating they are. And he makes a real hard and a very good run at establishing that really this is sort of the swagger that influenced rap music. And it's very, very much about the same things that rap music is about, like manhood and having, possessions and symbols of prominence. Anyway, in some of those versions, there are, when Stagger Lee is caught and shot or hung or whatever and goes to hell, he supplants the devil and becomes the devil himself, the king of hell, and starts to torturing all the souls of the people who have wronged him or whatever. There's multiple versions. So, and there are real versions of that song, of those verses. So when I learned about this, when I was reading Alan Lomax's work and his own writings about this, and it just like the idea. Well, he tells the story of him chasing Leadbelly all over West Memphis, Arkansas, going from like stomp to stomp, like little barn, and then going into Memphis. And he would feed Alan Lomax one verse and then say, well, we got to go to another place so you can buy me another drink, and I'll feed you another one of the verses, these infernal verses. And that sort of really made me be like, I got to write this has such great DNA. I have to write a whole novel about this. And so I did. I'm sorry. I had to get it all out as fast as I could because it is a complicated subject.
That's awesome.
Since technically in this book, it's a novella, and then there's a novel in there, and there's a novella in there. What do you have a preference as to writing? And also, I wanted to ask you, what do you think the strengths?
Mike, before you go into those,
yeah.
I think Rich's question actually would fit in perfectly here. Rich,
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, hey, I read Southern Gods right about the same time I was reading another work called Crawling Chaos Blues. I forget who the author of that was. And I was just wondering, given, say, Black Tom, given the use of Stagger Lee, it made me think of Mac the Knife and perhaps some other early rock and roll or blues songs that have really interesting origins. Is there something in, say, blues music or African music leading into early rock and roll that you think just lends itself? Is there something in the DNA that makes it something that ought to be paired with cosmic horror?
Well, so you have to really be careful. When I was writing it, I had to really be careful to not say like, black music is bad. Like African American experience, ultimately it was, I had to be very careful about not coming down on the side of like saying like, they're making a moral judgment on the music of African American South. That was not my intention. So I feel like I did a very good job of that. But on the other hand, because it's secular music, because it's about desire and murder and sex and all the things that sort of all those things went into rock and roll. The devil was the best thing that ever happened to rock and roll, and it comes from the blues, and it comes from that tradition of the blues, where the African American experience in the South is so fascinating when it comes to the filter through which they express it in music. On the one hand, you get spirituals and gospel. A lot of times in doing the research for this book, they would make they would say we would go to church in the same clothes that we went out the night before in, right? And it was this wonderful duality. It was sort of like a celebration of like the basest parts of base parts of human nature, celebrating the body, and then still going into church and celebrating the soul. So there's a neat dialectic there that is fun to play with. But in the end, I really, again, had to be careful to not, come down in any sort of morality or moral judgment, like, Stagger Lee was a bad man, or the people who sing the song, it is bad, which is what I really wanted to avoid. And luckily, just as an author, I had African American sensitivity readers look at it, read it, and sort of evaluate it for like anything I was saying was, because as a white male, a Southern male, you can there's a myopia. Like, I might think I'm being totally, totally above board, but there's this blind spot I have that I just didn't realize. So it's important for me, especially because I and more so now, I deal sort of head on with racial issues in the book, very, very head on. That it was important to have that the sensitivity readers look at what I was doing.
I have to say that I at my playlist with Robert Johnson, Howlin' Wolf, and Son House, Death Letter Blues, those kinds of that's what I was listening to as I read Southern Gods and Crawling Chaos Blues, and it works, right? Without any judgment. Those are very powerful forms of music, and I think perhaps in a certain sense they go together. Two separate art forms kind of mutually support each other when used in a certain way. But I think it is interesting just looking at the surface. Perhaps it's the Robert Johnson Crossroads myth that lends that kind of mystery or kind of atmosphere to blues, right? The devil at the crossroads myth that kind of lends itself towards blues and perhaps even early rock and roll as being, going hand in hand with not just cosmic horror, but just folk stories and dark folk stories and perhaps even scary stories in general, without any kind of judgment on the art form itself.
Well,
right.
The mythos. If we go back,
like
we can look at the Eric Zahn story, where we're dealing with classical music as being a tool of the cosmic horror, or James Wade's The Silence of Eric Zahn, where we're talking about punk music being a tool of cosmic horror. It's readily adaptable to any medium that you want to use.
I mean, in My Heart Struck Sorrow, there is a phrase, and I think it says what the power of music is, which is, like song has the power to change both the singer and the listener at the same time. The sort of like holdover puritanical, when rock and roll was blowing up and Elvis Presley was, bringing black music to the public and he was swinging his hips, it scared a lot of, people, because this sort of raw sexuality, the black culture had been celebrating and with a wink and a nod and an acknowledgement, but to the white culture, it was threatening. And so in a lot of ways, it's important that we look at it, that with the same intention that the original artist had, which was kind of like, it was kind of funny. It was a wink and a nod. Like if you listen to blues stuff that acknowledges sexuality or the devil, they were kind of tongue in cheek. These were tropes, and they were having a good time, and they were spinning stories that were there to entertain and to rile up a crowd and to get them engaged. And that's what it. So you have to sort of look at it in context. Or at least I think so.
So you use the term wink and nod, so that gives me an in. So in my work, in Reanimators, which also came from Nightshade and was also edited by Ross Lockhart.
Okay.
I make a comment, and I have a off the page character called Hadrian Varger, who is setting up his, right? I love that name. Someday I'll actually write about him, but he's setting up his own detective agency in New York City. And in Southern Gods, you drop a name, Nero Lupa.
Yeah, that's right. So, yeah, That's right. And the priest in Southern Gods is, like, for me, the unofficial brother of Nero Wolfe. Like, because he's from Montenegro. If you I don't know if you've read the Black Mountain, which is when Nero Wolfe and Archie Goodwin go back to Montenegro.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
So my whole idea was, one, I was just reading a whole lot of Nero Wolfe, and I just loved him, and I like, he's just such a big, like, pretentious goo bag of wonderfulness, and and I love the fact that Archie Goodwin. So in the Nero Wolfe novels, you have the new modern gumshoe detective, and you have the old idea of, like, the genius sort of in the same space, and they balance each other out, and neither is very good without the other, and they sort of parasitically work with each other, and I love that.
Yeah.
And so it was just probably because I was just reading a lot of it, so it sort of made its way into the book. But I like the fact that Nero Wolfe is all about reason, and I thought, like, if he had a brother, his brother probably was like, he'd be a priest, because his brother would be totally about spirit, spiritualism, and just because I have kids that are the dialectical opposites of each other. Not dialectic, but polar opposites. Anyway, so yeah, it kind of just creeped in there.
It seems that the older generation of horror writers drew from Chandler and Hammett.
Yeah.
And now we seem to be drawing from people like Rex Stout and and Wodehouse.
Yeah. I mean, but Stout wrote at the same time as Chandler and Hammett, some of it, but then he kept writing till the 70s, but it never really varied. Like, it still had the same sensibilities,
Yep.
But yeah, go
I
ahead.
was going to say, you could say the same of Agatha Christie as well. There's sort of the older elements of the mystery genre. They stayed writing how they always wrote, even if newer trends like Private Eyes became, like, the big thing.
Right.
So it makes sense for Rex Stout not to sort of adapt himself. He was selling how many copies of his books? Like one of the best-selling authors of the 20th century.
Yeah. And I mentioned him, and people were like, who? And I'm like, God, man.
Well, it's funny because, every once in a while, a publishing house will sit down and say, we're going to republish all the Rex Stout books. And they get through 5 or 10, and they're done.
Yeah, well, there's so many of them. So at that time, I, like, went on eBay and bought, like, I have a stack of 50 Rex Stout novels, and I don't have all of them, but like, in the little paperbacks, and they are like really slim. Like, they're very small.
They're short novels.
Yeah, they're very short novels. And he would write one. He'd write them in like 2 weeks. He'd just sit down and be like on a typewriter, smoking the whole time.
Yep.
And be like, done. Send it off to the editor.
Yeah. And you would get details inconsistently wrong. Like, the house moves.
Yeah, or something. But it doesn't matter. Like,
no, it doesn't. They were fun.
I'm real. Like, I am not a real stickler for stuff like that. You said Reanimator that you your was it your collection?
Novel Reanimator.
Okay, I just watched all the Reanimator movies last night.
Okay,
because they're on Shudder.
Okay,
and anyway, I had a good night last night.
Yeah, those are great. Yeah,
except during the last movie, which was just,
the one in the prison.
Yeah, it was so bad. I honestly didn't finish it, but
and tonight you're going to watch The Night of the Hunter again.
I think I'm going to try to.
Well, I stumbled across that article. Can you tell the audience about that movie?
Well, it's been over 20 years since I've seen it, but it's about a serial killer who's like a preacher who kills widow, like, he marries women and kills them for their money, which I don't know where it was taken from. I don't even know who wrote it. It seems sort of like
Oh, I do know who wrote that.
It's from a novel.
Is it Grubb?
Yeah, it might be.
Grubb wrote it.
Yeah.
Well, there was an article on Bloody Disgusting that I forwarded to John, and the title of the article is "The Night of the Hunter: An Underseen Southern Gothic Masterpiece."
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think last time I saw it, I was in college, which is probably more than 20 years ago. But yeah, it's a great movie. Doesn't Robert Mitchum have like finger tattoos in it? Like
love and hate on his hands.
That's an influence on the Blues Brothers.
Yeah.
Grubb has his own universe, and
yes.
I got into Grubb because one of the round robins in the Cthulhu mythos, the one that Bob Price was involved in, the magazine of fantasy, I can't remember what the title was, had somebody threw in Grubb has some town, which is in all his stories, and threw that in with Arkham and so forth.
Yeah.
John, besides Lovecraft, obviously, for the cosmic horror, who would you say are more of your influences that you haven't talked about already?
I mean, it's interesting. My dad was probably my biggest influence on my reading taste. So when I was a kid, he read me like The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, and then started getting me into like Bela Lugosi's Dracula, and then like the Abbott and Costello, horror.
He read the entire Lord of the Rings to you?
Well, enough of it where it was like, no, I got it from here,
Yeah.
But he did read all of The Hobbit to me and started the Lord of the Rings. And then, and for a Southern dude, that was pretty liberal-minded, right? In the 70s. And then, so he got me into horror and fantasy, and then I was a library kid. I had the library within walking distance to my house. So after school, I would go there and just, read whatever I can get my hands on. I read Dracula and Frankenstein, and then these sort of young reader versions of like Treasure Island and just all the like classics.
Yeah.
That all have a little bit of horror in them. And then one of my librarians gave me a John Bellairs book, which had the Edward Gorey, and that really sort of got me into like more of the, really more into stuff. And then I guess I was a little bit old. I got into D&D, and then I got into but the sort of inciting incident and all that was my dad. So and then movies. I don't think I became aware of Lovecraft and sort of cosmic horror until, honestly, we were. I don't know if you guys remember when you had cable boxes that had like 15 buttons, and then it had a little toggle with 3 on the left, and then if you pressed like it had it labeled like HBO is down on like the C10, right, or something. Do you remember that?
I do remember that.
Okay, and then for a while, if you went down to HBO, even if you didn't pay for it, if you pressed like 2 buttons to the side of it, it unscrambled the signal. And I was maybe 15 or 16, and we were I was unscrambling the signal to HBO, and Cast a Deadly Spell came on.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
That honestly, that probably. I had heard of Lovecraft before that, but I had never read any of his books. And then I was like, well, this character is named Lovecraft. I wonder what that has to do with it. And then, I love the movie. And so then I went to the library, and they didn't have any Lovecraft. So I went to my local used bookstore called Paperback Writer. Later had a cease and desist from the Beatles for them to change the name of it. But I went and got those little thin ones with the ooey gooey covers. You know what I'm talking about?
Valentine.
With the guy who's holding open the robe in front of him, and you can see like his rib cage. Anyway,
okay.
I got a bunch of Lovecraft stuff and read those.
You're not talking about Michael Whelan, are you?
No.
No. Okay.
The ones that had like a red, like it was
Oh, that is the Michael Whalen. Those are the Michael Whalens. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, but they were very slim volumes, little paperback releases. Anyway, that's how I sort of discovered that. I was a little bit older.
I don't know. I think Michael Whelan may be responsible for a great many people getting into Lovecraft. Those covers.
Yeah, they were evocative. The red eyes. I mean, they were monochromatic almost, except for like little bits of color, which was effective. And
it's actually all one painting.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
And then they featured certain parts of it because it was like a big mural type thing.
Right.
And I believe he's got a website where he still sells prints of those.
Yeah, it's a diptych, so it's a two-parter.
Yeah.
I have it someplace. All right, I gotta go, guys. Dinner's calling.
Thank you, Pete.
See you guys later.
John, what about writers that authors who are writing today? Who are some of your favorites? Or if you don't want to do that, maybe favorite books.
Yeah, no, I'll do it. My favorite book series of the last, decade is Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall. She's just an amazing writer, and I love historical fiction, so I read a lot of historical fiction. And then another book that I read that is just amazing is All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. It's a World War II book. That's really, I love, I really like historical fiction. Some of the horror people I really like is, Michael Wehunt. I hope I'm pronouncing his last name right. I've never heard it pronounced before. He wrote let me preface this by saying, I am a good novelist. I am not the best short story writer in the world, and I'm trying to become a better short story writer because I think that's sort of like the highest form of what we do. So I've been studying like really good short story writers. So I've been reading like Michael Wehunt, who has a collection called Greener Pastures from Apex. Nathan Ballingrud, who has North American Lake Monsters and Wounds, or The Visible Filth and Wounds. The Visible Filth was just made into a really good horror movie.
Did you see the movie?
I did. I rented it, I watched it on Hulu. I think it's on Hulu.
Yeah, because I've read The Visible Filth, which is the story it's based on, but I haven't seen the film yet.
It's pretty close. I really liked it. I thought it was quite good. Let's see. I mean, Kelly Link is a good. Her short stories are amazing. Roberto Bolaño's sort of shorter fiction is amazing. Stephen Graham Jones. These are people I'm looking to, like Brian Evenson. Like, I look to these people and be like, these are people at the top of their short story game. That's why I like to read their work and sort of like, see what they're doing to see if I can become a better short story writer.
Well, if you feel that that's the highest form of the art, I was going to ask a question a little bit ago about, do you prefer writing novellas over novels, and whether you do or not, what do you think the strengths of novels and novellas are versus each other, if that makes sense?
Well, I am having written a series of pretty long, fantasy novels. I am really enjoying the brevity of novellas. I think it has a lot of the strengths of a short story in the sense of pacing and the sort of immediacy of it, but it still has the space to explore characters and motivations and really establish a theme and tone and setting. So I think they offer kind of the best strengths of both novels and short stories. So I'm enjoying writing those now, but I'm back to novels. So,
any other writers you want to mention, or is that?
I mean, before I wrote some down just to remind myself. Before I started writing the Sea Dreams, I read Cast Call and Caitlin R. Kiernan's Black Helicopters and Agents of Dreamland, and then Stephen Graham Jones's Mapping the Interior, which is amazing. I gave that to my kid to read, and they were like, "Holy shit, Dad! I think about this book all the time." I'm like, "Yeah, he's an amazing writer." Jeffrey Ford's novellas. There's a lot of great writers out there. Victor Laval.
Yeah.
Probably one of my favorite things recently is Ram V's These Savage Shores. It's a graphic novel about a sort of Indian take on the vampire. It's very, very cool. So that's what I've been reading.
No, I'm not. I'm one of those guys who I'm really, really sick of zombies. But I've not read
Not me.
this. Not you. I have not read this Dark Earth, which you wrote, but Brian King, excuse me, wrote this Dark Earth is quite simply the best zombie novel I've read in years. Breathes some much needed new life into the dead. So I might have to give it a try.
Well, it'll be hard to find it because the rights have reverted to me.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. That was from Simon and Schuster, and they totally screwed that up. The release of that book. That was at the time that Simon and Schuster, the year it was released, they were fighting with Amazon. I don't know if you remember this, and so anyway, so that book has reverted. The rights reverted back to me. It is available. You can listen to it. It is available. We sold the rights of that to Journalstone, the audio rights only. So Journalstone has produced a version of that audio book, which I haven't listened to, but that was my second novel. So,
speaking of audio, my last question for you is: you mentioned what a fan you are of Lord of the Rings and Dracula. I think we're about the same age. You grew up in the '80s. Is that about right?
Mm-hmm.
Have you listened to the BBC Lord of the Rings?
I listened. I used to. Yeah, I don't know if you remember when it came out on tape.
Yes, I do.
There was that long sort of wooden box. Remember that all the tapes came in.
Yeah.
And it had the little top that you'd slide back, and it had 12 cassette tapes.
Yeah.
Yes, I listened to that many times, and then some fucking kid in my neighborhood got hit by a car. And my mom was like, "John, I want to take your Lord of the Rings and give it to him since he's going to be bedridden for." And I was like, "No, I don't care.
I don't care how hurt he is.
Buy him his own goddamn set of Lord of the Rings. This is mine. I keep this here." And she was like, "I can't believe that you wouldn't be, kind enough." And I was like, "No, I'm not giving up my Lord of the Rings."
Yeah, I thought I was really all that when I finally got the CDs version of the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
And so I do have that. I don't know what happened to my tapes, but I do have that, and I've also got it on Audible, so I can listen to it wherever I am. So that's one that I do re-listen to quite a bit.
But it was, it was an audio drama.
Yes, absolutely.
So you'd hear battle and be like, "Oh, everything I do today is going to miss." Yeah.
And then another audio thing in regards to Dracula. Have you heard or have you listened to Audible.com? I don't know if it's available anywhere else, but they've got a version, and it's not an audio drama. It is the book being read, but it's read by different voice actors for each letter, for each correspondence, or journal entry, or what have you. It's really good.
I've not listened. I recently listened to it on Spotify, which was just by one reader. And Spotify has, it's in the public domain.
Yeah.
So anybody who wants to record it or do a version, they can.
It really, that phrase breathes new life into it. It's really true here.
Yeah. I mean, someone was telling me there is a game, and I wish I could remember it, but there is a role-playing game which is all the manuscripts, all the found, the documents, because it is an epistolary novel. It's all told through news clippings and journal entries and everything.
Letters, yeah.
But then it has all these supplementary documents. And I saw somewhere online that someone's doing like a real thing you could buy that's like a trunk from the 1800s, and you open it up and there are all these like what look like authentic documents from Dracula that tell the story. But it costs like $500. Who has $500 for that?
No, yeah, but sounds pretty cool though.
Yeah, no, yeah.
All right, guys, do we have any more questions for John before we let him go?
I've got one.
Yeah, Rick.
Kurt Vonnegut, Kilgore Trout.
Yeah.
You used him in this Sea is Dreaming.
Oh, I mentioned him. Yeah, in passing. So one of the Sea Dreams of the Sky. Yeah, one of the things that I was playing around there was I really love the idea of in a real book having a whole literary world that is fake. And like there are honestly maybe 50 works of art in there that are just like I make up. That are these like that I just wanted to flesh out the world with literary novels from authors that have never existed, and I wanted people to like Google them, but I wanted to put in like a couple of hints, like Kilgore Trout, or I think there's Archimboldi, which is a Roberto Bolaño reference. There is in almost every single one of my books, I quote a guy named William Bless, who has a play called This Heavenly War, or Our Heavenly War, that all the characters sort of quote from, and it's like a well-known work of art. Like in the Sea Dreams, the book starts with Guillermo Benedicción, which is William Bless in Spanish, and a poem from La Guerra Celestial, Our Heavenly War. So anyway, I like playing with it. It's just fun to play with fake books and authors that never lived.
Now, I haven't read 27666. What sort of character is Archimboldi?
So Archimboldi is the first fifth, and it's a gigantic book, so the first 200 pages of the book are about these academics trying to figure out what happened to this author Archimboldi, who they all had a real academic interest in. And when you're reading that part, you're like, when are they going to find like his forbidden manuscripts? Like it really feels like it's about to be, it's about to drop some Lovecraftian stuff on you. Honestly, later on in the book, it deals with like Mexican women being killed, and it's far worse than anything Lovecraftian. Like honestly, in a lot of ways, supernatural stuff is a way for me to sort of compartmentalize the real horrors of like humanity. And be like, it's a way to sort of sanitize and protect myself from the fact that the real horror is us.
What you were saying before about book creation and so forth, it made me think of years ago. Dean Koontz had to apologize, or he apologized to readers because a lot of his readers would go up to librarians and ask if they could check out the Book of Counted Sorrows because they couldn't find it in the library. Which he used to quote the Book of Counted Sorrows at the beginning of almost every book, if you remember.
Oh yeah.
And it's just something he made up. So
yeah. Well, it's making up an author that writes books in your world is a great way to be able to write like something that establishes the tone of what you're about to do, and then give it some veracity. Like people just be like, oh, okay, it's this poem from this play or this book that sounds real, and it's saying really cool shit. It's kind of a dirty trick, but people go into books wanting the wool to be pulled over their eyes, and that's what.
Oh yeah, sure. Well, John, thanks for being on the show. It was great talking with you. Again, the title of the book is A Lush and Seething Hell. It's available in print and Kindle and audiobook at audible.com. So,
and it's probably available in any Barnes and I've been very lucky. It's on end caps, the Stephen King end caps at every Barnes and Noble.
I saw that. Congratulations. That's great.
Well, I know it's gonna. Hopefully, it means I might sell a few books.
Yeah, this will be the last time we'll actually be able to get you on the show because you'll be too big to come back.
Yeah. Well, so, now you just jinx it. Thanks, man. Damn it.
Sorry. In other news, John Horner Jacobs' career faltered because of Mike Davis and his jinxed him. So, anyway, yeah, thanks for being on the show, John. Really
Thank you very much, Trevor.
So, all you got to do is close your browser; it'll kick you out of here. So,
okay.
All right.
All right.
Thanks
Later.
again. Bye. Jeffrey, you're muted. I'll unmute you. There we go.
Okay, I'm good.
How are you?
Riding on John's coattails tonight.
That's right.
I'm a whore. I don't care.
Yeah, well, I wanted to get you on the show because you've got a book coming out soon, but I've got guests booked all the way pretty much through February. So you've got a book coming out when? Is it just in a few days?
It's November 19th is the official release date for my book. Okay,
so Tuesday, the 19th. A book called The Unnamed Country.
It just so happens I have it here. Yeah.
Down a little bit. Let me pin you on here. There we go. Oh yeah, it's a great cover.
Yeah.
Who did that cover?
The artist's name is Long Pham. He's a Vietnamese artist living in France, which is very appropriate because the book is a collection of 9 short stories inspired by my experiences in Vietnam. I've been to Vietnam 12 times, and yet the stories here are kind of set in an alternative world, kind of a fictitious Vietnam, and so they're fantastical. There's elements of horror, weird fiction, and science fiction, and even though it's a collection of 9 stories, they kind of thread together into a mosaic novel, so to speak. And the publisher is Word Horde.
Right, I was about to ask. Publisher's Word Horde, isn't it? So there's a print edition and I assume a Kindle edition.
Yes, exactly.
Are they doing an audio edition or no?
Not to my knowledge yet. Not to my knowledge.
Yeah. All right. So 9 short stories by Jeffrey Thomas.
Yes.
Are these all new?
It's funny. One of them was published in Black Static. It's a horror story because that's Black Static magazine is geared to horror, and one of the stories in here was published in Interzone, which kind of has a focus of science fiction. So that kind of illustrates to you, I think, that the stories in this book are kind of hard to pin down, and so a couple of them appeared on my Patreon website, but primarily they're original stories that I've not seen print before.
Well, that's kind of in your wheelhouse, though, isn't it? Sci-fi horror type thing.
Yeah. I think I tend to blend sci-fi and horror together. That's kind of I'm kind like I say, my fiction's kind of hard to pin down.
Yeah, it is.
Which doesn't make it easier to sell, but it is what it is,
Where did the title come from? Because I right away thought of Shakespeare's The Undiscovered Country, which is death, of course.
Oh, interesting. Actually, the title came from the Word Horde's publisher, Ross Lockhart. I finished this book about 6 years ago, almost, and I was kind of holding on to it, waiting for the right publisher. And in the past, I called it Tales from Somewhere. And so when I sold a story to Black Static, it was, the Black Static story is called Distinguished Mole, A Tale from Somewhere. And I sold the story to Interzone. It was called, I'm sorry, I'm getting mixed up now. No, actually, the story to Interzone was called Motherboard, A Tale from Somewhere. And so these were like stories that I thought of as being from a book called Tales from Somewhere. When it came time for me to when I talked to Ross about this, we had very little changes to be made to the manuscript itself. But the one thing that Ross did ask me was if we could change the title of the book from Tales from Somewhere to The Unnamed Country. There was a line in one of the stories where the country that is this fictitious country that all these stories are set in, this country is referred to in that one story as the Unnamed Country. And he said, could we change the title of the story from Tales from Somewhere to the Unnamed Country? I just feel that would fit better. And I agreed with him.
Well, and that, that's his job, to sell the books, and he's,
Sure. And his instincts are very good.
Yeah.
So it resonated with me. I agreed. And I'm kind of like notorious for like not being very receptive to the input of editors.
Really? I have no idea what you're talking about.
I'm kind of a dick like that. I remember one time recently, I sold a novella to Dark Regions Press. And Chris Morey has dealt with me enough over the years. He prefaced an email to me with he was like, Jeff, I know you don't like to change the stories, but it's like he had to kind of ease me into it.
Your brother's got his quirks too. One of these days he's going to write a sequel to The Sea of Ash, and then everyone on the planet will be happy again. But God, if your brother only knew how many people want that sequel. I keep trying to tell him. But I said to him one time, like a year ago, I said, Scott, I've got an idea that you could throw into the sequel. He goes, I don't want to hear it. I said, what? He goes, I don't want to hear it at all because it has to all come from me. Otherwise, I just don't want to write about it. I'm like, all right, fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's. It might seem kind of like a prima donna thing, but I think that's a sign of a person whose artistic vision is so pure.
Yeah.
That you have to kind of step back and respect it,
Or you could just say the Thomas brothers are hard to work with, but they're absolutely not actually.
Well, that's
no, you're not.
I remember one time I had a book coming out, Deadstock, from some Larry's books, and it was my first mass market. It was my first mass market book. It was a big deal for me, and yet I was still so protective of my vision that they suggested some changes to me that I wasn't cool with. At the time, I was in Vietnam on a honeymoon with my second wife, and we were back and forth with emails about my book, and they suggested some changes to me that I was not cool with. And then the editors got very nervous because they wanted to reassure me, okay, these are just suggestions.
Yeah.
If you don't like it, okay, it's only a suggestion. But I was so protective of my work, I kind of overreacted. So I just remember that I was in Vietnam and they're trying to call my hotel, trying to get a hold of me, trying to reassure me, and they couldn't get a hold of my hotel, couldn't get a hold of me, and they're trying to talk to some person in the hotel in Vietnam, and they're speaking Vietnamese and they're speaking English. And where's Jeffrey Thomas? Just let us talk to him.
Just tell him everything is going to be okay.
It's okay. It's okay. But
yeah. You sound like you're a little under the weather.
I have a bad virus, for about 3 weeks now.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm glad I got you in on the show today for a few minutes because I did want to let the audience know that you've got The Unnamed Country coming out in 2 days. So if you're listening or watching to this in the future, it's coming out on November the 19th.
Yeah. 2019.
So
I'm psyched because this is one of my bucket list for me to be having a book through Word to Word. That's big for me.
You said you mailed a copy to me, right?
I did.
Did you sign it? Did you?
Of course I did.
Okay, good. I was hoping you did. I forgot to ask you.
Of course I did. Sure.
All right. Well, geez. We were missing half our panel today anyway, and then Ben and Pete have to leave. So
I think they all bailed because Jeff Thomas is coming on.
Yeah, they didn't want to talk to me actually.
Yeah, fuck that guy.
They thought I was off my game today, so. So I've got a whole list of topics here that I'm going to leave till next time. But yeah, I've read this, Lush and Seething Hell, for everybody listening and watching. Definitely pick it up. It's some very subtle cosmic horror. It's really, really good. Um, I've read a lot of Jeffrey Thomas, even way before I even knew you, and I just it's just great stuff, and it's nice to know that you've got a new one coming out. So look for The Unnamed Country on the 19th, and actually they can pre-order it now, can't they?
They can, yes.
Yeah, you really help an author and a publisher. I mean, if you're Stephen King, maybe you don't really care, but if you're not, you really help out an author and a publisher if you go ahead and pre-order a book instead of waiting for the actual date, because that lets them know what kind of demand there's going to be, at least some sort of metric on the demand. So
Absolutely.
so yeah, pre-order it. All right, you guys want to talk about anything else, Rick? Has anyone here seen Doctor Sleep yet?
Not yet.
Not yet.
I have. I watched it last night.
Was it good?
It was really good. There were some changes to the book that I missed. I thought the book was done really well, particularly the ending that you didn't see in the movie, but the performances by the actors were just superb, and I mean, actually, the entire cast. So it was a really powerful movie, I thought.
Well, I heard it was sort of a sequel to both the Shining movie and the book, in a way. Is that true?
That is true. That is, yeah. You can't get around Kubrick's movie
No.
if you're going to do a sequel. It's just, despite what Stephen King may think of the movie, you just can't get around it.
Yeah.
Stephen King gave an interview where he said he was okay with what they did with the Kubrick movie in Doctor Sleep.
What I'm wondering is do you feel that in the sense that they acknowledge Kubrick's movie, did they have to compromise King's story? Because I haven't seen King's story and I haven't seen the movie. Were they able to?
Talking about Doctor Sleep, you mean?
Yeah. Were they able to acknowledge Kubrick's movie without compromising King's vision in the story?
Well, at this point, only Rich can answer that. Because I haven't seen the movie. I have read the book, though.
I haven't seen the movie, but Stephen King gave an interview in Time magazine where he was okay. He felt that they did not compromise his story.
Well, it's another Mike Flanagan movie. Rich, what do you think?
I thought they really they walked the tightrope really well between the two visions, Kubrick's and King's first book. I think you just couldn't get around. I mean, the Overlook is a character all its own, and in the book, it's a whole different ball game afterward than what you would see in the movie, or in both Kubrick's vision and what you see here, because it's a totally different ending for the Overlook in between the books and the movies.
Okay, now most importantly, I've got Rich pinned to the screen for the viewers. Now, don't you guys think, for everybody watching, that first of all, that's like the perfect background that he's got back there. Yeah, except for that strange Eons magazine, I'd lose that. maybe put up a Lovecraft zine book or something.
I've got that. I'll put up Autumn Cthulhu next time.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Yeah, and I'm kidding, of course. I'm looking at Rich, and I'm looking at that background. I'm thinking, all he needs is a pipe to complete this image.
I have two pipes right next to me with
oh my God, why is that not
pipe
surprising
tobacco
me?
right now. Next time I'll be smoking on air rather than just drinking.
Yeah, you can smoke and drink on this show. Yeah, definitely. All right, well, guys, I think I'll put a pin in it there, and all these other topics I'll talk about next week. Yeah, Rick.
I just wanted to say I recommend The Mandalorian on Disney Plus.
It's great. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's a space western. It is really it's done really well.
Space spaghetti western, a little Japanese samurai. I'm not going to go. They borrow from some famous TV series and movie series. But I'm not going to reveal.
Sounds incredible.
And I love what the MacGuffin turns out to be.
Last but not least, we've got 3 Kindle prizes this week. 3 copies of the Kindle version of Douglas Wynn's Smoke and Dagger, which is a recent Douglas Wynn book, Wynne. Matt's handling the prizes. Just send an email to easineprizes@gmail.com, easyineprizes@gmail.com, and he'll randomly pick 3 people from the emails and send them a Kindle version, or Doug will. So,
Mike, is this another the latest episode of the Spectre Files?
I believe it's a prequel.
Is
to
that on audio? I know the first 2 are on audio. I'm not sure the third one was yet.
I don't know. But yeah, I believe it's a sequel to the Spectre Files, and I hope I'm right. Otherwise, Doug will kill me. But I think that's right. So, all right, everybody. Rich, thanks for being a patron, Rich. Really appreciate it. Jeff, go get in bed. Thanks for being on the show. And thanks, Rick, as always. Thanks, everybody, for watching, and we will see you next week.